Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. I'm James Baggett, founder of Car Dealer magazine, and today on the show we're talking used car prices with the valuation experts from Cap HPI. Joining me, I have Head of Valuations Darren Martin and Head of Forecast Andrew Mead. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you very much for joining me. Now, a quick introduction for these guys. Cap HPI doesn't really need an introduction. It's one of the leaders in its field, both in terms of valuations and vehicle history checks. Darren has been with the firm since 2013, joining after a 17-year stint at Vauxhall, where he worked in the first in the fleet sales, then as vehicle life cycle manager, looking after residual values, forecasting and risk management. Andrew joined in 2013 too, and he's got 35 years experience in the automotive sector, including nearly 30 years at Lex Autolease, where he was in charge of all residual value forecasting. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, got any questions about used car valuations, please fire them across and I'll ask the chaps. But I've got quite a few of them myself. So let's get cracking. Firstly, Darren, I'm going to turn to you. It's been a very turbulent time in the used car market. You've just closed the June book. What have you seen?
So we stopped moving values, as we've documented previously, from the 24th of March, and then we didn't move anything until the 11th of May in our live product. So we made the decision around that time that volumes were then in enough, there was enough data really to start moving values, but only over 5 years old. So we've not moved anything under 5 years old, because the data just wasn't there. We've not been, the manufacturers haven't really been selling, rental companies, leasing companies haven't been selling to the volumes required for us to act responsibly and move anything there. So we've left that area. Over 5 years old, so between 5 and 20 years, we've reviewed about 1,700 generations within that. That's the total number that are all over 5 years old, and we've moved about half of those in value, and the average movement of those that have moved was around 2% down. So so half of those haven't moved at all. They haven't required to be moved. That 2% on average, but there have been some that have moved at around 5%. Volumes now are around 24% of normal. So we are definitely getting up to where we need to be able to well, we've got past where we need to be to responsibly move some values, but the drops have not been dramatic.
So we'll go into some of the specifics of that in a moment, Darren, if that's okay. But I mean, firstly, there'll be a lot of people wondering when you're going to start moving those newer cars. There's clearly probably been quite a lot of movement in that area, but it's very hard to judge with the current volumes. What are you thinking about in terms of a timeline to get back to valuing those cars?
Yeah, so we're reviewing it all the time and looking at that, and we won't react until we're very, very confident that what we're doing is portraying what's happening in the market. The reason that we started moving things again was because there are now volumes of cars being sold in the trade of around 1,500, 1,600 a day. Previously, it was only about 1,000 a week in the first week after lockdown, so it's increased dramatically. I can't answer definitely when we'll start moving cars under 5 years old. There's a phased approach, really. If we've got volume maybe between 5 and 3 years, we'll start moving that first. If the market does start to reopen, which obviously we hope from the car showrooms opening and volumes increase, then we'll be moving up. I would say it will be during June. Whether it's early June or mid-June, I can't really say at the moment, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing when we do move those values. Prices have moved. We're obviously reviewing the data that we have. I would expect the movement to be somewhere in the region of where we are with the older cars. It tends to be like that, maybe up to sort of 5%, but I don't know that at the moment. And I wouldn't use that as a rule of thumb. And the way we work, we look at everything in isolation. So as I say, half the valuations haven't even moved in what we've reviewed. They haven't needed to. So we'll review everything in isolation, but it will be during June, to answer your question.
Because there will be a lot of dealers out there worried about what the movement's going to look like. They're sat on stock and have been for quite some time. What comfort could you give those dealers in terms of what they can expect over the next few weeks? And I know it's very hard to predict at this time.
Yeah, well, this is trade volume, trade transactional, which is very, very important to stress that. Retail has hardly moved at all, and that's excellent that that's happened. Retailers have held their nerve. During this period last year, there was a movement of around 6% on 5-year-old cars. It was quite a volatile period last year. April and May after Easter tend to be when values do move anyway. So those movements that have been made that haven't been made this year, there's almost a bit of a catch-up required. Cars have aged during that time. The market does tend to drop around this time, generally when volume hits from the March market, from part exchanges, the extra volume there. So any movements that have been made, as long as they're not too dramatic, they are not far off in line what would normally happen at this time of year. They're just probably playing a little bit of catch up from what hasn't moved during April and May. Because obviously we didn't move anything during April at all in our live product, and and the first 10, 11 days of May we didn't move anything either. So it's certainly not dramatic what we're seeing. We actually saw a drop off in the first couple of weeks after lockdown. Prices were then around 80% of cap, very, very low, but on very low volume and on very low value cars. We've actually seen a recovery since then. So whilst the prices, we've had to drop some of the prices, percentage of cap being achieved has gone from 80% then to around sort of 93, 94% of cap now. And that's cars in all conditions. So you can't use that as a direct comparison to cap clean, but there's a lot of sort of positivity out there, I would say, because now the auctions they've got some clarity that they can reopen from the 15th of June, showrooms opening from the 1st of June. So it's quite positive out there, and obviously online capabilities have improved throughout the lockdown period for car showrooms and for auctions as well.
Just before I turn to Andrew for a slightly longer term view, we obviously had some fantastic news on Monday that dealers can open again on June the 1st on Monday. What impact do you think that's going to have on used car prices and those volumes that you've been seeing? How quickly are things going to accelerate?
That's the $1 million question. Nobody really knows what's going to happen to demand, consumer demand. There will be some pent-up demand, we believe that. So there will be people that were looking to buy a car, or their PCPs have ended. They may be looking for a used car now. Obviously fairly well documented that people who aren't very keen to go on public transport will look to buy a car. So I think there will be some demand. Initially, I think people are going to be wary, and all of the car showrooms, all of the dealerships are getting themselves safe and encouraging customers back in. I think there will be a bit of wariness out there. Supply-wise, I think there will be supplies will hit. We've spoken to manufacturers that have got volumes to come back. There will also be that the car dealerships will be clearing the decks of cars that they've got from May. They'll have to, if they're sold, they'll have to move those cars on. There will be some unsold cars as well that they'll have to move on. So we don't think that it will be massively buoyant out there in the trade market for car dealerships to stock up for a couple of weeks whilst they're clearing what they've got. Hopefully on prices, they'll be looking at, in the trade as well, looking at what the prices were in March as well as our product, and say, this is what we were selling at then, this is what we'll sell at now, and treat them almost as consecutive days. So ignoring the fact that they've got older and days in stock metrics and things like that, which can mean they reduce their prices. So I think, so in summary, I think there will be some demand, but we do see supply initially outweighing that demand.
Andrew, let me turn to you and just ask you what the longer term view is for used cars. I mean, how are you seeing the market panning out over the next, say, 12 months?
Yes, that's a good question. I was going to start with the next 12 months because my team produce forecasts for the next 12 months, which we view as being short-term forecasts, and then also forecasts for 1 to 5 years out into the future. So listeners to this article will be familiar, I'm sure, with our Valuation Anywhere product, which is where they can see our forecast for the next 12 months. So for June, when that data is received, we've reforecast the short term. At first glance, it'll look like we're being very pessimistic about the movement from June into July. It's about 4.5% on average, varying a little bit by sector. But that 4.5% is only what we'd expect to see as a normal movement between the months of April through to the end of June. So with the market being inactive for a couple of months, we're basically just putting 3 months worth of shift of values into the July forecast. So if that looks a bit alarming, as I say, it's only what we would normally expect to happen. over the 3 months of the year. As Darren said, the first few weeks and month or so is going to be very volatile, but we don't think that the movement will be worse than what would normally happen over that 3-month period. Then if I'm okay to go on and talk a little bit about the longer term, this is where we see a bit of pressure on values, particularly over the next 12 months, because although I think there will be still good demand from a number of people, a lot of people will be concerned about the economy, about job insecurity, and spending money on a big ticket item like buying either a new, used or new car. So we think over the next 12 months, the balance between supply and demand is going to switch towards there being oversupply, because there's a lot of cars due to come back into the market from previous year's registrations. That's going to happen. We can't stop that. And certainly over the next 12 months, I think those economic factors are going to suppress demand a little bit. So although we're still working on what our new forecast will look like for the longer term, our current thinking is that the next 12 months could be quite difficult. And values by next summer could be maybe around 7% lower than they otherwise would have been. And that's particularly because next summer we've got a peak of returns coming back from previous year's fleet registrations, particularly, that will overrun the market a little bit. But then looking more into the longer term, 2, 3, 4, 5 years into the future, our view is that certainly by 3 years' time, values will be back to where they otherwise would have been. The economy and consumer confidence will hopefully have improved, and also the shortfall in new car registrations that's happening at the moment, and that we think will continue through into at least the early part of 2021, that will reduce supply 2 to 3 years into the future. So we think that longer term future is quite rosy, which is good news for PCP business, for example. I think that 3-year PCP rates shouldn't change significantly, because our forecasts I expect to be pretty much unchanged. Interest rates should hopefully remain low as the government's trying to restart the economy. So I think it's good news for the new PCP market.
Darren, can I ask you, is this a case of making hay while the sun shines then, considering what Andrew's just said? You're thinking there's going to be a little bit of a bounce in the medium term, in the short term, but the medium term looks quite difficult. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you need to be very careful with that, because we don't want everybody piling their cars back into the market all at the same time. From what Andrew said, obviously we've never been in this situation before, and forecasts are that they're forecasts. It's not necessarily what is going to happen. And the more that remarketers can spread their defleets over a period of time, the less of an impact there will be. So I would certainly say if they all come back into the market in a very short period of time, volume is. The car market is all about supply and demand. Values will drop if there's an oversupply situation. So we would encourage anybody, finance houses, leasing companies, rental companies, to phase their defleets over a period of time. And if they all hit in one go, they'll all be competing with each other. There'll be oversupply. It will obviously be dependent on the brands that are out there. We're already aware of remarketers that have a lot of stock, and we're trying to sort of say, hold your nerve a little bit on pricing and see what happens to the market when it comes back, and phase those defleets. That would definitely be the message.
I've heard that a lot about dealers holding their nerve, and many people have reported it to us. You know, other trade price people, also classified websites have said it too. How does that sit, though, with a consumer that is going to be out there looking for deals? You know, they are expecting to get a deal on absolutely everything, and that business is very tough, and they've seen the automotive industry shut down for 2 months. How does holding your nerve sit with a consumer that wants the best possible price?
I think you can still please your customers. Then obviously there will be people that are looking for a good deal. It's a big ticket purchase, and they'll be thinking, yeah, I can get something cheap. But it's a bit like the housing market as well. If people do hold their nerve on things like that, you can and stick to what you want to receive. Hopefully everyone can be happy. And there are still some good deals out there on cars. Obviously, there's monthly rates as well, which will keep the public happy. So I do think that there's some good deals out there still, and you can appease everybody without having to reduce prices by a long way. And there's sort of winners and losers in sort of consumer world at the moment with prices. So you might want a good deal on a bike, but bikes have gone up in value because everyone's out there cycling. So if you want a deal on a car, I think you've got to be prepared to pay the market value for that car. And what we do is we just reflect what that trade market value is for those. So yeah, they may want a deal, but I think if you can sway them, then we don't think prices need to drop considerably at all.
Andrew, what do you think an impact of a scrappage scheme would have? We reported this morning on the news yesterday from France of the huge stimulus package that the President Emmanuel Macron has given the industry over there. It's renewed calls for a scrappage scheme to be put in place here sooner rather than later. What impact will that have to the used market?
Yeah, I think at the moment the impact is very difficult to assess because we don't know what form that scrappage scheme will take. It could be like the French one, it could be something completely different. The government may decide to focus on simply restarting new car sales, or it might be more of a focus on reducing CO2 and improving the environment. So depending whether money is available to reduce the cost of buying a new car, particularly probably an electric vehicle, or whether the scheme is more towards making sure that the older, dirtier cars are genuinely scrapped and people, rather than buying a new car, move further up the chain to a cleaner used car, it's very difficult to predict. What we do know is that when there was the scrappage scheme in place in 2010, the money that was available, most people put it towards buying a small petrol car because that was the smallest outlay that they could make at the time. So it was great news for the sales of small petrol cars, and a lot of manufacturers in that area did very well out of it. But there was a clear effect that the new car prices were so low that used car prices for small petrol cars fell quite a lot over the period that scrappage scheme was in place. So we could see something similar this time around, but it does depend whether the focus is on getting people to buy new cars cheaply or simply scrap the oldest 10, 12, 15-year-old diesels and move further up the chain, in which case there might be less of an impact on used values generally. We'll have to wait and see, but I do agree that the sooner something is announced, the better, because we've seen in other countries that all the speculation has put people off buying a new car until they know for sure what is happening. So hopefully we'll hear something fairly soon.
Yeah, that's certainly what we've heard from other markets, that the more it's talked about, the more consumers put off buying cars.
Yeah,
certainly don't need that at the moment. Darren, what models are you seeing a hardest hit in terms of valuations at the moment, in terms of those ones that you have moved?
It's very dependent on the supply levels of them, and nothing has been particularly hard hit. Around sort of the 5% area, I guess, some of the more expensive cars within that sector. But I would say that what has gone well are cheaper cars. Definitely, there's definitely been, and that's been fairly early on, that cheaper cars were being sought after. Since then, there has been a sort of a desire for an ability to be able to sell some slightly more expensive cars. And we've seen some cars of around sort of 40, 50,000 that are still sold. We're actually quite surprised by some of the activity that's been out there, sort of almost from day one, really. So nothing has really been hit particularly hard. I wouldn't like to sort of name any particular models that have been hit hard because that would send the wrong message. They haven't really. It's been around that sort of 2 to 5% area, which you would expect to happen during this time of year anyway. So so I would say smaller petrol cars have been doing probably the best, but overall nothing has been particularly hard hit.
What are your thoughts?
I would sorry, James. I was going to say I'd give a similar answer in terms of my view for the next 12 months. While we go through that difficult time, I think that the best cars will be the smaller, cheaper ones. For the very reason that people will be nervous about spending a lot of money. So I think that effect will ripple through the next 12 months. Small and cheap, or larger and older, making them relatively cheap, I think will be the more in-demand vehicles for that difficult period.
We have seen some cars selling cheaper by certain remarketers, and we were but that is not necessarily the market. So there's been quite a big fluctuation between what people are selling for, because there's not really a market out there. So people are trying to test it where they should sell at. We've not reacted to some of that really cheap data, because there are others that are selling the same cars at more. So we don't want to reflect what sort of individual companies are selling for. We want to be reflecting the whole market. So yes, there have been some cheap cars out there. There's been some dealers trying to buy cheap cars. There's obviously been consumers, as you mentioned earlier, trying to buy cheap cars. But we're trying to reflect what is going on in the whole market by looking at the transactional data. So there have been some cheap cars out there, but we're not necessarily reflecting that because there are others selling for more.
So do you think that June the 15th, when the auctions open in earnest once again, I mean, I know they have been transacting online, but the volumes have been far less. Do you think June the 15th is going to be the real day that we really see the true picture of what's happened to used car prices in the UK?
I don't think with the 15th of June, when the auctions open, is going to have a dramatic impact. I think it's going to be, it's started to improve already. We've seen volumes going up again this week, now at sort of 24% of normal, so almost a quarter of the levels there. I think people are still going to be wary about going out and about, and obviously the auctions, I'm not really expecting flurries of people to go in. It's not going to be how it was. They're all preparing themselves to be safe areas. With PPE, with all those measures that everybody else is doing, and I've seen the videos from the car showrooms. There's going to be some concerns for the general public going out, and I think what's happened with online sales has helped during this time, and all of the auctions have managed to enable themselves now to do online sales. I think there will still be a lot of online. There will be less people in the auction halls. It's not as though it's going to suddenly all reopen. I think it will be phased again, and volumes will increase, but they won't suddenly go back to where they were. I think it'll take quite some time to go back to where volumes were previously. So it's sort of baby steps almost now. We're reopening, but not certainly not the floodgates.
Darren, I'm going to ask you about this in the short term, and then perhaps Andrew can give us a picture for the slightly longer term. But Hertz obviously filed for bankruptcy at the weekend. There was a lot of concern in the trade. Actually, I think Umesh Samani from the IMDA wrote about it on our website yesterday about what impact those cars could have if they flood the market. I mean, what are you hearing on that side of things in short, and then Andrew, perhaps in the longer term?
I think I can reassure a little bit here, because Hertz, mainly their cars are on buyback. Most of their cars are on buyback with the manufacturers. They do a small number of risks, but mainly it's buyback. So the cars will go back to the manufacturers to responsibly remarket them. The vast majority, or say 3/4 of what Hertz registered last year, were done in the first half of the year. So they would have registered less in the second half. So those first half ones have already come back into the market, or a lot of them will have done anyway. So they've already come back in. The volumes are fairly large, but they're not the biggest rental company in the UK by any means either. So those cars have already come back, already been remarketed. The ones from the second half of last year will go back to manufacturers, and those volumes are definitely they're definitely copable. And obviously what happened in March, when the timing of the lockdown, there won't have been that many registrations in March for them. And already the signs of COVID-19 hitting were there, and rental companies were very wary in March as well. So I think it's okay. I don't think there's an impact on values from what's happening to Hertz. And obviously there is talk that they may save their European arms anyway, which would be great news. But honestly, I don't think there is going to be a lot of volume coming back in one hit from a company that, if a company goes bust, you can tend to get that in years gone by. But I think it's definitely manageable. They've got a very good mix of stock as well from a wide variety of manufacturers. So it's not as though they're all under one brand or anything like that. So I can sort of reassure, I think, on there that we think everything will sort of be fairly normal.
Andrew, on that point, do you see any risk from that going forward into the longer term? And on a more wider scale, are there any other risks out there that could affect values on a longer term in a similar way?
Well, I think thinking of the rental industry in particular, I think our intelligence is that the rental companies are holding less stock at the moment than they would do normally, and they intend carrying on with that because they're not going to have the volume of business that they would normally have. particularly over this summer. So I think the normal large volume of used supply that comes out of rental next year will be less than it would have been otherwise, which is quite good news since that's a difficult period. But there will be a lot to come back next year when they replace their stock. I think on the broader question of what else could disrupt the market, I think it very much depends on the economy. As I say, we've done a lot of modelling of when we think the peak fleet returns will come back next year. Those could be further extended, which would take a little bit of the pressure off. Or if the economy took a very negative downturn, then more companies could sadly probably fold, and there'd be more cars coming back to be sold. And if that all happens simultaneously, that will be bad news and put the market under pressure. So it's difficult to predict these things, but there's always a risk that could happen.
Andrew, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the used car market going forward?
Definitely optimistic in the medium to long term. As I say, the next 12 months could be difficult, but I think going forward after that, with that dip in registrations this year, with causing a lock of supply in future years, and the overall trend in registration volumes has been downwards for the last few years, which we see continuing. So I think once we're through the short-term difficult period and the economy's recovered, I think it'll be good news for the car market in general, 2 to 3 years and more out into the future.
Darren, are you seeing any impact on in particular fuel types?
No, I think there's a place for everything at the moment. I think certainly diesel cars, there's been a demonisation of diesel. The volumes are now lower in the market, have lowered over the last sort of few years in the new car market, and obviously that washes through to used. There's still a market for diesels, and they're relatively clean cars, to be fair. So there's still a market there. If you were sort of coming out of a company car but still doing the miles, you'd still consider a diesel, definitely. I think electric vehicles are only going to go from strength to strength, really, with their demand. There's a two-tier market, really, in electric vehicles. That cheaper end, your Nissan Leafs, have been very popular over the last few years. The more expensive ones, they've been under a little bit more price pressure, as they're still sort of finding their place. Two very, very different buyers there. So the trends, it's too early, really, to see the trends. What that's happening there, and we'll obviously reflect on that over the next few months. But I think there's a place for everything, really, there. I don't see anything being untowardly hit. I would see the real strength in that petrol, smaller petrol cars, though, but also electric vehicles. People maybe for their second car now considering either a smaller petrol car or a small electric vehicle for those sort of local trips.
What about commercial vehicles, Darren? I take it that with many people stuck at home and the amount of home deliveries having to take place, that's probably given the van market a bit of a blip, or is that not the case?
Well, the van market is the volumes are obviously the volumes in the van market are a lot lower than cars anyway. We're getting about the same percentage of normal on vans, but we haven't moved any values because that is a lot lower volume. But what we are seeing is some strength, and that's recovered. And we measure vans against cap average rather than cap clean, and they're above cap average at the moment in the small volumes that we're seeing. There's a little bit of demand out there. You think about the shops that previously weren't doing any deliveries and now considering doing deliveries and are buying those vans. So we think the van market will be stronger than the car market going forward, and there's some opportunities there. So yeah, a bit of strength there. Similarly on sort of motorbikes and things like that as well. We have a motorbike product as well, and we haven't moved any values in motorbikes, but I think they'll move in June as well, and they could be quite positive as people either look to them for deliveries or as a route to get into work if they're not going to go to public transport. That's an opportunity there. So I think there's definitely some strength in different areas of the market.
I'll certainly give some commercial vehicle dealers some hope there, Darren. I mean, what about the longer term, Andrew? Do you think that's going to continue as we go forward?
Yeah, it's very much the same picture as Darren's described. I think unlike the car market, where supply and demand does vary over the course of time, depending on taste and the economy, I think the van as a tool of trade and a business need. Even in difficult times, businesses still need to operate. So I think in the longer term, home deliveries, that's here to stay. That's not going to go away. And I think, although sadly a lot of small businesses may fail over the coming months and the next year, equally there'll be entrepreneurs starting up new businesses to replace them, and they'll want a van of sorts as well for their business. And with the much lower volume of supply than we have with cars, I think the future of the van market is really quite positive.
Andrew, what the dealers you're speaking to, what are they the most worried about at the moment?
I think they're worried about the short term, about what may happen when the market does reopen. I think everyone's hoping there's going to be a bit of a bounce in demand, and that prices will stay stable. But I think everyone's worried that there could be a collapse in the market. We don't think that in the short term. As I say, we've just got that longer term view over 12 months that there is going to be oversupply. But I think dealers are probably worried about the relativity of small cars versus expensive ones. The future for premium cars and expensive ones in the short term. But as I've tried to explain, I think although there's going to be a short term dip, the longer term future is all quite positive.
And if you had one piece of advice to give to dealers now, what would it be?
I think it'd probably be a repeat of what we said before, but it's hold your nerve and don't race to the bottom and sell at any cost. Just hold your nerve, get a good value, and keep the whole market buoyant.
Darren, what cars? I know we have covered this already, but in summary, should dealers go out there and buy right now?
Well, one of my editors always says, he's been sort of in the conversations we've been having with dealer groups recently, is if it was a good car to buy then, it's a good car to buy now. And realistically, that's so true. If the vehicles were good value in March, they haven't changed dramatically. If you were willing to stock them, then nothing has dramatically changed with regards to that. Obviously, the whole landscape of the country and the world has changed. But with regards to buying of cars, if it was good then, it's probably good news now. I would certainly be looking at that lower end. I would be sort of thinking the car supermarkets that will be looking at. They'll be fairly positive about life, I would say, because smaller, cheaper cars. If people have unfortunately lost their job or have decided to come out of a company car for financial reasons, then they may well be looking at some premium brands that are around that sort of 7 to 10k mark. So certainly stocking vehicles of that area, I would say will be a good thing. Overall, I think sort of to add a bit of what the question you asked, Andrew. I think safety is the main concern as well for dealers. They're going to be having to encourage people that they are safe environments to come back to trade with customers for sort of for part exchanges and things like that. We've developed an appraisal app for consumers and for dealers where you can put your registration number in, it returns all the vehicle details, you put your mileage in, you then can take photographs of your car and upload that directly to the dealer's websites so that they can then produce a value for your part exchange, basically. So there's no sort of social contact required for things like that. So I think for dealers to try and minimise that social contact, I think been listening to a lot about sort of clicks and bricks and things like that. There will still be people wanting to go and test drive. There will still be people wanting to go and visit the showrooms, but as much of that you can make online will help the dealers out. So those sorts of apps that mean you can value your car and send it through. Somebody comes back to you with their appraisal as well, and you come to an agreement without having to do that face-to-face showroom contact will be good things for the market.
And that app sounds brilliant. And I understand it's in trial at the moment. Or when do you think it's going to be rolled out properly to consumers in the trade?
Well, it's on trial with a big dealer group at the moment. So I would say we're hopeful that will be up and running over the next few weeks. So yeah, it's sort of an exciting sort of development there, which we were already working on. But yeah, opportunities arise from this type of situation.
It sounds brilliant. So thank you ever so much, chaps, for giving us your opinion on used car prices. I know it's keeping you incredibly busy and probably will do over the coming weeks and months. I wish you the best of luck with it, but thank you for joining me today.
Okay, thank you.
Super. Thanks ever so much to Darren and Andrew there for giving up their time. Over the next few days, we're very soon going to be another weekend, but in between now and then, we've got Peter Waddell tomorrow. He's from Big Motoring World, and he's going to be talking about his new venture, Carzam, which you can read about on the Car Dealer Magazine website today. And then on Friday, we're speaking to Trustford Chairman and CEO, Stuart Folds. If you want to get involved in Car Dealer Lives like this one, you can email me. It's james@blackbullmedia.co.uk. Find me on Twitter @CarDealerEd or on LinkedIn. If you want breaking news sent direct to your phone, you can join our Car Dealer Magazine WhatsApp group. Just send me a message at those methods I've already mentioned, and I'll send you a link. If you haven't already, please download our latest Car Dealer Magazine. It's a digital copy. It's completely free of charge. You can find it on the homepage of cardealermagazine.co.uk. That just leaves me to say thanks once again to Darren and Andrew for joining us today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks very much. Goodbye.